Yes, guess who is back? The Youth Roundtable. Good afternoon, our dear viewers. My name is Matanda Abubaker, your moderator of the Youth Roundtable on Civic Space TV. Every week, we have always assured you of bringing you weekly dose of sense from the young people of this country. When COVID-19 came around a few years ago, we are sure all know the various ways in which it disrupted life. Actually, one could say there is no sector that has been spared, and there is no life that has been spared. It has distorted life, it has wreaked havoc on people's businesses, it has taken away employment. But there is one critical sector that we usually keep coming to, which is the sector of education. We have said on this show before that education is the greatest tool for both individual and social transformation. And this was one of the sectors that was closed thanks to COVID-19, or one could say approaches to check COVID-19. Schools were closed, universities were closed. There have been attempts to take learning online, but not having a digital population, and with all the infrastructural challenges we have in ICT, it is said that has not gone very far. The last time we were here talking education, we had a panel whose majority suggested that schools should be opened, and they should be opened now. Some of the members of the panel, in agreement with government, said, well, we all understand how important education is, and yes, schools should open, but then life first. So we cannot just open. Some things must be done. The Minister of Education, through the Minister herself, the First Lady, Honorable Janet Kataha Museveni, was unequivocal in stating some of the conditions that are needed before schools can open. One, that we needed to have all the teachers and learners immunized. Two, that we needed to ensure schools have prepared adequately to observe the SOPs of distancing, of sanitizing, among others. Skeptics, on the other hand, argued that government does not seem to have capacity to immunize the people, including the teachers. They had statistics on their head. As we speak now, according to the statistics released yesterday by the Minister of Health, out of the over 500 teachers in the country, half of them have been immunized with the first dose of the AstraZeneca vaccine. Only about a quarter have got both doses. So at that pace, how many more years shall we need to open schools? But yesterday, the Minister of Education called a stakeholders meeting that involved proprietors of schools, teachers, and other agencies that are in the space of education. And what was being discussed was on how to open up schools. It looks like government has budged and is willing to at least have a conversation on reopening schools. Our grapevine showed that there is willingness within government to start opening schools in September. By September, I mean tomorrow. And then in a phased manner, keep rolling out. Is it safe yet? We have not vaccinated. What has changed? What needs to be in place? Where is the plan as a country? What proposals are there? To put all this in perspective and dissect it in depth, I have a very diverse panel. You know how we do it on the Youth Roundtable. And just on my right here is a lawyer, but whom we learned this afternoon is actually a human rights lawyer, Mr. Martin Musiime. It is a pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much, Advocate Matanda. I'm very happy to be here. Like he says, I am a human rights lawyer, and the area of education being a human right, certainly is of great interest to me, and also the fact that I'm not very many years away from school. I've been in school, not very many years ago. So it's very central to me. Yeah.
Pleasure, we are glad to have you. Of course, in the Youth Roundtable, we subscribe to the principle of nothing for us without us. So when we are discussing education, we must have students, well, we have former students, like he has said, but we must also have students who have been affected squarely. And Julia Muhumza is the Minister of Gender in the Guild government of Makerere University Business School. Julia, I think this is your second time on the show.
Yes, and I'm so humbled and grateful to be here. I also dabble as an education activist because I'm so passionate about education. And like he said, being a victim of the closure of schools, I'm so humbled and grateful to be on this platform to share my opinions.
Education activist, she said. I like that one. Many activists in this country seem to focus on certain things. I'm glad to hear that we have activists in education. Mr. Robert Kigongo is a social and political commentator, but he also represents the Youth Coalition on SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. So Robert is going to give us a perspective. Shall we achieve some of these goals with what's going on, or do we need to sit and revise the goals given that we now have the pandemic and all these challenges? Robert, you're welcome to the Youth Roundtable.
Thank you so much. I'm glad this is my maiden appearance with Civic TV. In the Youth Coalition, we believe in leaving no one behind. And I feel absurd that we are leaving out a generation that is not at school. Each day without going to school is an exclusion. So I'm happy to be here for further engagements.
Thank you, Robert. And last but by no means least is Vicky Namugobe. Namugobe represents the young people of Sironko District. Yeah, we don't just want to talk to these people in Kampala here. Namugobe represents the young people of Sironko District to the National Youth Council, and she's the Secretary of Female Affairs, Sironko District. We hear that some of the victims of this lockdown have been girls, and many of them have since been married off. Many of them are pregnant. We have someone from down there, as some people say, who can help us put this in perspective. Vicky, it's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm so glad to be sitting together with these great members on this panel. I appreciate so much, and to me, I will keep on saying it, as I have already said, that school should have been opened yesterday. So here we are again to discuss these matters, because a lot of girls have been affected coming from my home area, and well, I speak a voice not only for my home area but also for the country at wide. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Vicky. I'm going to start with you, Robert. You said when it comes to SDGs, there I believe we are talking UN, your motto is leaving no one behind, and you feel that a generation is being left behind. I'll put it to you that a generation is being saved from dying of COVID-19. What do you mean by a generation is being left behind? We are just trying to save whatever we can here.
First and foremost, we all know that science has proven that COVID doesn't severely affect children. It mainly affects people of an advanced age and people who have other chronic diseases. So children are prone to COVID, but they are not, I don't think they will be having a very huge effect towards their life. SDG 4 talks about quality education, access to education, and equitable education. The day we leave out a generation without going to school, we are excluding a generation from other generations. I'm done with school, but last year I had plans to go back to advance. Those plans were postponed, and I feel like I lost an opportunity. So do many other 1,000 change agents that I represent from Greater Masaka. Leaving no one behind, we can't focus on having children at home. Either way, the parents are already in the other populations. So how are we saving the children? The parent goes to work, he comes back, still we are not...
Robert, not to cut you short, children don't teach children, children don't prepare food for children. you know that in the entire ecosystem, our education here is very physical. So there are teachers, there are non-teaching staff, and children can be carriers of COVID. Well, maybe they are not adversely affected, as you say, but when they are sick, they can transmit the same to other people. So what do you say to that? And that's why the Minister of Education is saying, before we open schools, at least let's have all the teachers vaccinated.
Well, we all know that schools and churches are the most organized institutions in the world. You have senior one in their separate class.
Don't forget the military.
You have streams. I'll stick to schools and churches.
Fair enough.
History has proven, even in the contemporary days, that schools are the most organized institutions. Once teachers are vaccinated, I think we can have children back to school. But I subscribe to a school of no one should be forced to be vaccinated. However, we should coerce them to be vaccinated.
Okay.
Interest them to be vaccinated.
You almost lost me there. No one should be vaccinated against their will, but we should coerce, and coercion and will cannot be in the same basket.
That's where civic engagement comes in. I think we are losing out on civic engagement, because if we had civic engagement prospering throughout all the corners, through different generations, everybody would appreciate the advantages of being vaccinated. But on a principle that nobody should be forced against his will. However, we can engage, civically engage one another to appreciate the advantages of being vaccinated. So that once teachers are vaccinated, we can have the kids back at school. I'm proposing that maybe we can cluster them. You can have one faculty for Monday, all 3 faculties on Monday. We can use shades, not enclosed spaces. Observe the SOPs, and the teachers do their work. I think that's how best we can approach this problem.
Okay, I'm going to come back to you, Robert, but for now, let me go to Julia. You introduce yourself as an education activist. You possibly break that down for us. And you said you have been affected as a student. There are some people who argue that if we have the markets open, if we can have weddings of up to 20 people, if we can have burials, that those of you who are in universities and in tertiary institutions are mature enough to follow the SOPs, so maybe you should have been opened yesterday. Is that your view? Do you find that plausible, and if so, why?
I really agree with reopening of schools as early as yesterday, meaning even months back, especially for universities. When you look at the second wave, fine, it hit institutions. But one, I would like to stress the fact that, okay, fine, vaccination is being emphasized now, but vaccination without strict observance and adherence to SOPs is next to nothing. So as universities, we are students who can social distance. We are mature enough to know I have to put on my mask to keep safe. As a as a COVID survivor, I can guarantee that once I'm back to the school, I know that I should do what I have to do to protect myself and the people around me. Closure of universities, and of course there's so much that went on, adoption of Odell, which is equally ineffective in public schools. You see that we were affected. Fine, we tried to adopt to the system, but being a public university, there is a section of students that is being left out. As we discuss reopening of schools, we are focused on, okay, fine, schools are going to be reopened, but it's only a section of the students that are going to go back, looking at all the factors in place. Why do I say we were affected? The government wants us to adopt to Odell, but the tuition is equally the same or even a bit higher. And on top of that, you cover your own data purchases, on top of the connectivity problems. That is the first issue. So you are actually accessing education, but you're not benefiting. Then also we have to look at the fact that, okay, fine, they're going to open and we're going to go back to school. But if the government cannot come in and consider the section of students as a whole, as they discuss measures, we expect them to consider the fact that we have been home, families have been struck by the lockdown. If education is a priority, then they should have incentives or measures to have students go back, but actually go back, not only open schools and assume that all the students will go back, because majority will not go back to pay that high tuition.
So if I'm getting you clearly, for your concern is not even about whether to open or not, but you're saying opening without some sort of support for the students is as good as not opening.
I want to say that it is not as good as not opening, but I want to stress the fact that the government is only looking at the section of the people who can adopt. Like, we move with those that can move. So as they reopen, my humble plea is to implore the government to consider all the sections of the people. If you're looking at
Yes.
for example, private universities, for like UCU, they've been studying, but they're still paying the same tuition. Why? Because they're the same taxes that they've been paying. Sorry, the institution has been paying the same taxes before COVID and after COVID. So the government can waive some of these taxes on institutions, so that in the end we have tuition waivers. And also, when you look at Makerere, fine, the 15% tuition increment was a bit recalled for a certain period of time. But again, being a public university without incentives to enable students to adopt to the Odell or whatever it is, that
Incentives
means
like what?
Incentives, for example, if the government cannot look into the internet tax they passed to either recall it or put adjustments, they can enable could be maybe incentives in form of data, whereby institutions have access with maybe Airtel, MTN, so that whoever logs on to the institution's website for studying, it's free of charge.
But don't you think what you're offering is quite contradictory? On one hand, you want them to waive the tax on institutions, you want them to waive the tax on data.
No.
On another, you want them to give out freebies.
No,
Where will they get the revenue?
I'm actually giving them options. In the end, what we are trying to achieve is students having access to education. You're opening the schools, but given the status quo, we can no longer meet the ends of being in school. So as the government, on top of opening the school and on top of us adhering to the SOPs and all that you put in place, there must be something that you're putting in place to ensure that we adopt. Could be in form of revising the internet tax so that we can afford the data that we use to study. Could be maybe, for example, around MUBS we used to have MyUG, where people in hostels would use to access, but it was also recalled. So if the government can have an option, one of those, to enable us to access the education where schools are being open, then it would be a good thing. But all that I'm trying to say is schools must have been opened as early as yesterday. Why? Because on top of us being in position to know what to do and when to do it, I feel like there is no reason why we're at home. There's really no reason. Because the vaccination, even if they vaccinate, first of all, I would like to remind us that the easiest way the government would have vaccinated the students and the teachers or lecturers would have been if we are already at school, because then they have the target population in specific areas. So really, I don't see any argument as far as closing schools is concerned. And lastly, I want to highlight that on top of everything that is being discussed, I think only allowing a specific class to go back does not really help us. Before us, I didn't exist by then, but I heard of a method where people would study in the morning to lunch, they go back, another section of people comes in. So if the school does not have a facility to handle the entire population, at least they can go with about not one class or not two classes, but at least more than two classes, but in form of shifts, so that we all keep moving on.
Thank you. I like that you're speaking mostly in terms of solutions. Mr. Musiime, or Councillor Musiime, you say you are a human rights lawyer, and you have heard Julia insisting that we should have opened yesterday and pushing certain things that government should do. She actually seems to vest a lot of responsibility on government, which is something that you as human rights lawyers also do all the time. And government keeps telling you, you need to be considerate. You know, sometimes in a crisis like this, you cannot start talking about rights. It's about saving life first. I actually had a commissioner who fell short of suggesting that the SOPs and the Health Act in these circumstances is over and above the Constitution. You cannot speak the Bill of Rights when people are dying, you know. So try to help us put this in perspective. Where is the place for rights and some of those responsibilities for government vis-a-vis the responsibilities of citizens and other sectors? There is a private sector, there is civil society, there are parents. Why are we hearing government?
Thank you very much, our moderator. I'll answer your question in two ways. And the second one will be the one to directly answer you. That is to talk about the rights and other laws or principles involved therein. But the first thing is I would like to appreciate COVID. In fact, if time would allow, I would have knelt down and thanked COVID for this opportunity.
Must be a sadist.
To wake our government up, you know. I think from the time of the SAPs, of the structural adjustment programs, governments all over the world, and mainly governments of the former, I think, hippie countries, these highly indebted poor countries, went relaxed, just opened the economy and left every sector, including the health sector and the education sector, into the hands of capitalists. These countries went and fell back to the military, okay? No wonder we've been hearing the military wanting to teach in schools, the military, you know, military is actually construction, military is even now involved in COVID, the COVID fight. You see, the head of the task forces, the heads actually are RDCs. RDCs are like the heads of security, okay, in each district, and these are guys with a lot of military, you know, influence and military power, and most of them are actually soldiers. So COVID then triggers or tries to poke the brains of our leaders, you know, and asking them, you know, where are you? You know, I am here, but and I'm affecting these institutions that you did not give concern to, you did not give attention to, okay? And now COVID, I am here. So now governments have to restructure their thinking. They have to come back, because at the end of the day, government is in charge. At the end of the day, politics, you know, and governments have to shape society. They have to give direction. Now they sat back, and now COVID comes, and here we are asking for questions from guys who had left the education sector and the health sector. So I thank COVID for waking them up for us. Okay, challenge is that maybe governments, and mainly our government in Uganda, is not acting fast enough. You see, you keep waiting, because I remember in March last year, when the president was making these directives orally, moreover, he said, when I was capturing power in 86, what did you guys do? Did you continue studying? No. So we shall do it the way you did it in 86. Exactly. You know, yes, we shall pause, then you study again. You already study. What are you rushing for? So there is that, and I think government needs to be very active, yeah, in handling education. So, and then secondly, education is a right. Actually, it's not a privilege. It's a right that is entitled to all the children in this country. Not even children, all people actually in this country. For as long as we have the right to education in this country, every person in this country is entitled to that right. And when you seek it, you are supposed to find it. Well, like any other rights, it also has a limitation, okay? But then, to what end is the limitation? And should there be any limitation on the right, even that limitation is supposed to favor the right, not the limitation. So, yes, they have closed schools. They have put an end to many of you know, activities involved in schools, but to what end? Whereas the end is to prevent the spread, but even in that limitation, consideration should be given to the right to education. government hasn't put into place the infrastructure, internet or otherwise. We heard of radio stations and what, but then they're not effective. So government has to consider the right, put into place mechanisms that ensure that children of this land, mainly the children, because we've seen the statistics. Today I was seeing 22.5% of girls are pregnant.
Yeah,
Okay.
teenage pregnancies, yes.
Yes, 32, I think those are the ones below 18.
Yeah.
Yeah. 34, around 34 to 35% have, I think, are dropping out of school. School-going children of 10 years to, I don't know, 15 or 18, around there, are dropping out of school.
And the minister, if I can just offer some guidance on that issue, the Minister of Education said you can't blame that on the state because the children are with their parents in communities. So this clearly is a failure of parents, is a failure of the community, and not government, as you seem to be suggesting.
And again, in the modern era and in the modern time, and under the framework of our constitution, because as Uganda, we have laws, okay? And also with SDGs and also with the international conventions, actually Uganda is party to, the state has an obligation to educate its citizenry. So I think the comments of some policy makers and some politicians is not informed.
They have not denied that. They have not denied that they don't have the obligation to educate.
Yeah.
But in this case, there is a life-threatening crisis.
Yeah.
And so we ask that let's first pause, let children go back home as we sort this mess. And we are spending sleepless nights trying to deal with it. As we are doing that, we then hear that they are getting pregnant. And we are saying, really? They are with the parents. What more can we do? Are we not shining our responsibility? You know that whereas there's a Bill of Rights, there's also Article 17 that highlights the responsibilities of a citizen. So we cannot just emphasize only rights when we are also shining our responsibility.
No, but again, the state can't run also from its responsibilities because we can't continue. And the burden, actually, the obligation is greater on the state to provide this public good called education. But again, if then we are in this thing of pregnancies are many and then we have to balance pregnancies and the danger of students being out of school or the danger of them being in school. And people have been giving us the statistics and have been weighing in. It seems the danger of them being out of school outweighs the danger of when they are in school. Okay, so death, and because we've agreed that most of the school-going people are not as susceptible or prone to COVID, like the other people. And in any case, that's manageable in school. So when you find that the right, and that is what I was talking about, the right to education or going to school and being educated, and whichever way. By the way, I think it's wrong for us to think that education should only be tied to only going to school, where we are still a low developed country. But again, like I said, government has to put into place the infrastructure so that they lessen the fear of death, but then they provide the right. Because at the end of the day, that right is the one that is going to make this country a progressive country and maybe a prosperous country.
Thank you, Martin. You have created more questions in my mind, but let's turn this into a monologue. I'll come back to you. Let me first go to Vicky. Vicky, you represent the young people of Sironko District to the National Youth Council. And in Sironko, you're the Secretary, Female Affairs. And we have heard that teenage pregnancies have shot up. Some statistics put it between 22 to 25%. That's a very high number. Out of every 100, it means out of every 10, 3. And I also have it on record that Eastern region and the Elgon region particularly are featuring very prominently in this. What are you people as youth leaders doing? When we speak about government, we're actually talking about you. You're established by an act of parliament. For you, it's even worse. You are the Secretary, Female Affairs. What better affairs than this? What's going on? What's the status and what's happening? Who is not doing what?
Well, thank you very much. I have actually been following your conversation, the both of you, and it kind of rhymes with mostly with my office concerning the issues of ladies,
Yes.
the girls. First of all, as I had earlier on said, the closure of schools, well, it was a preventive measure given the fact that we are going through a catastrophe of the COVID pandemic.
Yes.
At one point in time, it seemed to be working until the lockdown kept increasing, going more days, going more time, increasing. And again, just as kids had just gone back to school again, all of a sudden we ran into the second phase. And then again, a lockdown. But from what I am seeing, really, the issue of COVID is here to stay. And we need to find ways of adopting to find into the circumstances that are happening right now. Yes, schools have been like, I would call it a sort of a guardian shield to most of the girls that have been going to school. Because yes, the effects of teenage pregnancies have been around. The effects of early marriages have been around. So we cannot always put the blame on COVID. They have been around. But with the coming of COVID and with the way the government has handled it, the results have spiked up. We find that the teenage pregnancy is becoming rampant. Personally, I receive calls from wherever I am. Oh, how are you going to manage? We need to do this. How? Please calm down. Let's see, the girls are getting pregnant. And I'm not going to, yes, the First Lady came out and spoke about the issue of, I think they were trying to throw the ball away from their camp into another camp. So they're like, it's the responsibility of parents. The parents and the community are not playing the right role. I'll still say, as he had explained before, that education is a public right. It's a right that we need all to embrace. So we cannot keep, the state needs to ensure that we have the welfare of the citizens. So yes, the parents also have their role to play. Them as them, they have a role to play in order to safeguard these girls. But now, what is the way forward? We are not going to keep throwing the ball left, we throw it right, center. No, we need to find a way forward now. And for me, I still insist that we really need to find a middle ground. We need to go back to education. Schools need to be opened up once again. And we need to find measures in which we can find, I will not go back and speak because people have been saying that, yes, girls, they'll need pads, they'll need everything. No, but I think the major thing, because when we came to schools, girls came to schools, it changed a certain mentality in them. They are groomed. With the experiences they share with their friends, they also find sex education there. With the experience they find with their peers, with their teachers, they find ways of guarding themselves and abstaining more and finding ways to fight the vices of getting into early teenage marriages. It's the school that has been breeding this in them. Personally, because I've been in school and I know what school has brought into me. I have friends who, because they stepped outside the influence of education, that they found their ways perverted, they ended up in illicit relationships and all that, and they got teenage pregnancies. But the fact that I was in school and groomed in a Christian school or whatever setting it was, there were regulations, there are rules, and that were guiding these girls, guiding us as girls to keep within the line and knowing that we are working hard for something that is better in the future. So now, if the schools are closed, that means we are home. Some parents don't have time for us. Some parents don't have space to sit down and teach us this sex education and whatever. But within the setting of school, we found this embrace, we found this standard. So what are the proposals we would find? Yes, the government would speak about vaccinating of our students. The government could speak about taking the COVID tests every time. But as she had stipulated before, I'll still support her in one way. Because you cannot say you're going to vaccinate students and then the majority of students are scattered all over the country. First of all, people have had a wrong perspective about the vaccination. They have it in their hearts that, I was reading somewhere, they're saying today the ones who are vaccinating are wondering 2 years from now, the ones who are unvaccinated, how will they be? And then the vaccinated ones are wondering 2 years from now, how will the unvaccinated?
Actually, that every group is waiting for that one to die.
Exactly. So that's the fear that within, and if you find that the turn-up of the youth going for vaccination is not much, it's not great. But if it were confined within their school settings, imagine you're going back, there will be a teaching where the school can take it up as an initiative to teach these people the value of vaccination. Yes, before going back to school, let's get the COVID tests, because a healthy mind works in a healthy body. So, and it yields more when you're healthy. So let's take the COVID tests. If the tests are negative, we encourage them to go back to school. Well, as they go back to school, within a school setting, the government can find it appropriate, and the teachers and the people within the institution to teach the students on the positive impact of the vaccination. There we shall find that people are getting vaccinated more and more, and schools will be rolling, and these issues of the vices of being out of school will reduce. So we can adopt to that. And in circumstances where we find that the schools, like personally, I have just finished a small course at LDC, a diploma in law. If you find the population we had in school, it was everybody says law is difficult, but we found ourselves we are 500 plus just in the evening class. Then there was also that day class. So the population is
Huge.
too vast and too difficult to maintain. But later on, I saw when LDC was adapting to the process, they encouraged online classes. But we cannot encourage online classes when we are not, it's very difficult people to have smartphones, so they need to try to reduce and get a subsidized prices or levy taxes on the gadgets that we keep getting, and also on the data. The online classes were encouraged, but we found also whereby the timetable was adjusted, whereby the places where we had elective courses, the space interval, usually it's an elective course comes in and then a second elective course comes in just immediately. You find people are crowded at the entrance. But with the time course, the timetable was adjusted like by 3 hours. When the first elective course came in, 3 hours later, next one would come in. And then when we came in, an adjustment was made in the timetable whereby they would say maybe A to B, you study this time. And then B to D, a specific period. You find that you are not so crowded and you are not many. And it works out.
Okay.
It worked out really so perfectly. And it was also helping other people to adjust into the system. And at the end of it all, we had a virtual graduation because people tried to adopt, and we did not register any case of COVID.
Okay, so there is, after all, a method to this madness. I have some questions for you, but allow me now get back to Robert. Robert, my panel has suggested some solutions, but also sounds very depressing. It's like they have a problem for every solution. There is. Julia said, as we are talking about opening, there are some issues that have cropped up. And of course, your motto was leaving no one behind. So we hosted on this show, an education is the chairperson of the academic association at Makerere, and he said through his experience as an educationist, he predicts that even when we open, 40% of the learners will not show up for different reasons. We have seen on media teachers who have abandoned the profession, and bricklaying, making chapatis, and some people have said they are going to hit a jackpot and realize they have always wasted time in education. We have also heard from investors, proprietors of schools. Musiime noted that this was largely left to the private sector. The proprietors, the capitalists, as he called them, have been crying about bank loans. And the Minister of Finance said, well, it's okay if you are drowning, sell off these facilities. So maybe they heeded to the advice of the minister. So as you're asking that we open, there are all these problems for every solution you're proposing. Which way? How can someone deal with this?
First and foremost, as we are discussing children going back to school or students going back to school, we forget the aspect of education equity. I think it's a very big area of contention that we need to discuss. This rhymes with access to education, SDG 4, and education being a right to everybody. While we are advocating for people in urban centers to go back to school, there's someone in Chanamkaka, where I come from, that doesn't have an opportunity even under normal circumstances to access education, or with someone in Karamoja. So I think it's also very fair that we should hold a debate on health equity, on education equity. Solutions have been proposed. But one, there is no way to go apart from going back to school. schools must be opened. We have a rise in child labor, which we are not discussing. Children have dropped out of school. They've all gone into odd jobs. And this is a country where the economy is literally surviving on borders. You can see a very good generation, well-able men. They are all driving borders. Well, it's another way to earn a bread. But I think we are going to see competition in the economy of border.
Is that not just in the urban centers?
It is everywhere across.
Okay.
I think that's we are headed for. If we continue to close schools, we are going to have an explosion of a border economy. It will scale up than even what we are. Because if you see, especially the boys, when you talk of the girls that are facing a problem of teenage pregnancies, the boys are dropping out of school. We are basically scaling up child labor. So I think schools must open as early as possible in order to achieve SDG.
But Robert, it's not in dispute that schools must open. What, however, you're trying to draw your attention to is that there are systemic and structural challenges that have come up already, that even when we open, men are not going to show up. Even when we open, the proprietors are out of business. Even when we open, the instructors are not willing to come back. So what does one do to deal with this?
This goes back to government. Government has a social contract with the citizens. And the education sector presents quite a very huge number of the population section. It's government to have an engagement with the banks to give some sort of benefits. My sister here called it incentives. So this is the time that the education institutions need government. You give them a holiday. The way we give holidays to investors who are actually exploiting our country in actual sense, because they are taking away what we have and bringing less. Why don't we give some incentives? Why don't we give some leverages to these schools so that they can recover from what they have lost? Secondly, when you're discussing solutions that teachers must be vaccinated, children have dropped out of schools, can we think of a holistic approach? Recently, we heard about a fund that was established to help teachers to recover from COVID. Something, or it went to you, not to some. It went to a certain body.
MSC.
The money is nowhere to be seen. So really, we need a holistic approach. And I think it's also high time to talk about an emergence fund that should be able to, a social emergence fund that should be able to address all these factors. We shouldn't only wait for COVID and calamities to happen and then we wake up. I think we shall never address such problems unless we have a cooperation framework to address such issues.
Thank you very much, Robert. We are going to take a break. I must say some of the submissions are very depressing. It looks like we are doomed. But I can promise that when we come back, we shall sound a bit more cheerful. Of course, I'll press some of the responses harder, so stay with us.
The Citizens Chatroom happens every Friday at 2 p.m. on Civic Space TV Online on Facebook and YouTube. We invite you to be part of this conversation. Civic Space TV, freedom always.
Welcome back, our dear viewers. We thought that our panels were sounding very depressing, so we offered them some water so that they get some energy. Now that we are back, I'm putting them on the firing squad, and I'm going to start with the lawyer here. Mr. Councilor Musiime, you did say that you think that COVID has done well in exposing the weaknesses of the capitalist system in a free market economy that also abandons the health sector, that abandons the education sector. I will put it to you on very good authority, whether it's in academic circles or in political economy circles, that capitalism or free market economy actually puts out the best output. It spurs innovation, it enables many players, and I can tell you that previously, when government was managing these sectors, they were managed poorly. So we said, let's open them up. And there is evidence to show that there has been tremendous improvement. So are you suggesting that we go socialist, a system that failed?
Again, it's with the idea that everything should be binary is one thing I always disabuse. So when I say I'm opposed to the capitalistic mentality, does not necessarily mean I'm socialist, you know. It's not an either or. The world is full of gray.
Yes.
Okay. And you're saying that capitalism, what free market economy encourages innovation. What's wrong with the government also being innovative about those social goods it's supposed to provide?
Two reasons. One, it's against history. Historically, governments are bad business entities.
Yeah.
Two, you don't want government to again compete with the private sector, do you?
No, I'm not saying government in doing business, but I mean government providing the social good. So if you realize that, okay, we went capitalistic and still full-blown capitalistic and there are still gaps, okay? Still capitalism, the free market economy and leaving everything to the private sector has had gaps and their challenges. Then why don't you revisit that and get involved again in providing social goods? There are actually countries in this world.
Yeah, I was about to ask, has that worked anyway?
Yes, there are actually countries in this world where education is treated as a matter of state until you decide on your own that, you know what, I can afford, let me opt for private. In almost the entire Europe, actually, education is a public good. They will pay for you your tuition, or they'll cater for you until you get tired. You'll do elementary school, you'll go to primary, you'll go to secondary school, you'll go to high school, you'll go to university, PhD, when it is the government paying for you. And those countries actually do not consider themselves socialist like you wanted to.
Yes.
So I think it's about the government being deliberate on what it wants in a certain area. I mean, we have people here who decided that we want the army to be modernized, we want the army to be all this glory, and they have achieved it. So if they could achieve things for the military and the army, why can't they achieve them in the education sector?
I like that you
the
bring
health
in
sector?
the military, and therein lies my other question.
Yeah.
Because in the beginning, you seemed to suggest it is wrong that the military seems to be leading the effort against COVID. And I want to put it to you that one, COVID, the president declared is a war. The commander-in-chief declared that the fight against COVID is a war. And he also stated that the methods that were used in the Luero war, like stop, keep quiet, listen to the enemy, are very effective in this war. And maybe to go academic, I'd also tell you that a state exists to protect life and property. And maybe we are not going to have the hardware, the wars that need bombs and war formations, the war front as traditionally known. The wars we have now are biological. The wars we have now are in things like the COVID-19 pandemic. What then is the problem of deploying our good force, which you seem to be giving good ratings, because you're saying they achieved making it modern, among others. What is wrong with deploying the modern army to fight a war like this?
Well, giving the good ratings, maybe in the administrative structure and the fact that maybe they've been able to educate their colleagues and be a bit modernized, but as to many of their actions, I think that can be another conversation of another day. But going back to the securitization and or militarization
Yes.
of COVID, well, all leaders have different strategies, and
Yes.
perhaps Museveni, being the president of Uganda, being a person with military training, perhaps for him he thinks militaristically, but also it's important to be alive to the global trends and also global data. If the World Health Organization has not said that this is something that is outside our purview, and it went on and declared it a global pandemic, then why would we assume that this is a war? Okay, so as far as war is concerned, I think to get informed on a decision that whether this is a biological war or anything of a nature, then there should be information to back that up. But for now, we know that this is a global pandemic.
Hold it. By saying that this is a war, there can be that sense of saying someone has set this up against us. That's there for the conspiracy theorists. But in this case, we are just saying war, not in the literal sense, but in the sense that your duty is to protect life, and there is an enemy who is out here to end the lives of your population, and so you go to fight the war. Of course, they are not the generals who are heading task forces are not using bullets. They are now employing engaging this enemy in the means that are necessary. So in that sense,
I think, sorry to disappoint you, our military leaders and our government, like it has been shown even through COVID, are more trained for the kinetic wars, the physical wars, and the wars that involve a physical aggressor, as opposed to this kind of war. So I think it's better to employ more the science, to be focused more on the medical point of view, and that is where actually we got a big challenge when the first lockdown, in the first lockdown, militaristic means were used to combat, because apparently it was a war, so militaristic strategy was used, and that is why people got out bullets, and you're fighting COVID and you're matching LDUs, firing people are pregnant, going to hospital, firing them. So people died actually last year because of enforcing curfew, and that is where the challenge is. So the science-based approaches and the human rights-based approaches would work, as opposed to thinking that this is a militaristic. No. Other countries, New Zealand, okay, it's among the countries that at least have been praised. It's not even the military taking over, no, but these are civilian leaders employing the statistics, employing the data, employing also human rights conscious decisions. And now it goes back to the education. So we have to, again, as the government, as opposed to empowering, because what is the military doing, having a big budget in fighting COVID? For example, schools don't have budgets given to them to fight COVID, and you're giving the army. So let us protect the rights, and among those rights is education, okay, as opposed to other means that are being used, in the guise of COVID. Yeah.
Thank you, Martin. Allow me go to Vicky. Yes, please.
On that question of the government protecting vis-a-vis us being at school, I feel like when Vicky says that it was okay until months, when we have another wave of COVID, it is okay for government to close. But when then government opens markets, opens other sections, why does it close the education system? That is our concern. When you look at last year, in 2020, there are months where we did not even have a case of COVID, but there are classes that have never reported back to school since then. So I think as the ministry stipulates when the academic year should start, or the academic calendars, I feel like they should continuously have consultative meetings and engage more with Ministry of Health, so that when they feel it's safe, they can open and allow other classes to go. And maybe in case another wave comes, it is okay, because they need to protect us. Close, let the situation get back to normal, but let education be a priority as you seek to allow everything back to adopt.
Oh, interesting. You make very valid arguments and suggestions, and I'm just wondering, you are a student leader in a national university, one would say. And I know that you have guild governments in these schools, you have student councils, you have the Uganda National Students Association. We have not had these very nice suggestions anywhere. We have not seen letters, we have not seen columns in the newspapers. What's happening? Because the student and youth movement would be the ones advising government or even putting them on pressure to act. The Ghanaians say, people scratch where it itches. Governments respond where there is fire. Yeah. Where is the student movement in all this?
I think the guild presidents have been doing something lately, you know, to engage media and then out their opinions. Because when school is closed, usually councils do not sit as often, but also guild presidents have a chance to sit and then they get to represent our opinions. A question of why not, I'm not really sure because I'm not one of them. But then the other concern would be the Uganda National Students Association. I think we're all aware that we didn't have elections, and a time where we needed such a body to help represent the opinions of students or to be a part of the decision making to influence some of these things are being passed. We do not have the leadership there, which is also pending until when schools will fully open. So I think that is where the problem comes. Though I would like to implore all the guild leaders, I feel like this is a time where we need to work together, collective effort, and try to see what is UCU doing, what is helping them. We try to borrow ideas from this university to the other for the benefit of each other in different institutions.
You know, I'm listening to you and I'm wondering, students and the student movement must be so soft lately because my knowledge, well, I was a student leader myself, but drawing from my own experience, but also from history, it is known that students and youth generally somehow always have their way. From what I'm hearing, you say it's like you have sat back and you're hoping government and all the other stakeholders find their way. What happened? What could have gone wrong?
I don't think we have sat back, but I think what exactly we are using to communicate is what would not be effective. We have these deliberations amongst us. We sometimes push for sessions to discuss with different parties in the ministry, but usually, you know, the bureaucracy, some will not want to listen. So in the end, I feel like, you see, I don't want to say we should riot, but I feel like we should, you know how activists do it, like with a lot of force and consistency. That is why our guild leaders should be at this point, or all students leaders.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that.
Protesting is okay.
Yes, you know, it appears like in this country we have been convinced that a demonstration is illegal and bad behavior. But well, I don't want to incite my young friends. But to you, Vicky, so we had in our first round that there are structural and systemic challenges that have come up. I did quote the chairperson of MUASA as saying he fears 40% of learners may not come back. We have also heard about the teenage pregnancies, the percentages are up there. And I'm just wondering what can be done. It looks like we are doomed. Maybe we should save whatever we can and move with that. Is there anything we can do to save the learners from teenage pregnancies, from early marriages, and then save the proprietors who have lost or sold their schools and infrastructure, and then save, you know, bring back the teachers? How can we deal with this, especially particularly for your case, looking at the teenage pregnancies and early marriages?
Okay, thank you so much. First of all, I would like to sound out a call, not to the ladies. It's not that I'm encouraging them to go out and continue with their vices and whatever is happening, but I would just want to sound out a call to them that if you get pregnant when you are in school, it's not the end of you. That doesn't mean that, okay, now that you are pregnant, you're not going to, your life has ended and it has come to an end. I have interacted with a lot of people, and I have shared experiences from different people about it who have been victims of teenage pregnancies and they have gone back to school. But it's just that there is need for a framework to be established to find a way forward on how to be helpful to them. Like when in circumstances where we find that someone is a victim of a teenage pregnancy, whatever the cause, we are not going to go back and look into your past and wonder what went wrong and what did not go right. We just want to find a way forward for you. So the best solution I would advise to such ladies who are going through the experiences of teenage pregnancies is go back to your places wherever you are. If you have decided to go for marriage or wherever you've decided to be, or you're back into your parents' custody, I would advise that it would be a right methodology for you to come back, think about education. Let us, can we in the society groom an environment where, like a rehabilitation center, where we get to sit down with them and tell them, you know what, this is not the end. You still have some better aspects to go to. Can we try to find a solution where we encourage them and tell them, you know what, okay, and the parents should also be encouraging, because I have seen of late in the news a little girl that failed in her exams and she was not encouraged by her parents. She ended up committing suicide. Can we find a place where we can teach them and try to boost their psychological aspect of it, to know that that is not the end about it, so that they can go back to school? Can the government find, can we try to see the best interests? What could they do best? What is it they could do best? What do they love doing? Can we start up vocational schools for them? And I think the government is already working on to that, because I came to understand of recently that in different regions, the government is trying to put up vocational skilling schools, whereby we are saying, this is not the end of you. Please, let's promote your skill. Probably in the future, your skill could be something that you could base on to upgrade and things like that. So also we are also looking at the issue of teenage pregnancies. Those who are pregnant, they are delivering well. If I say we take them back to school and put them in a school setting, and we encourage and we tell the government, yes, let them be in the school setting, because currently the rules and regulations that govern schools are strict. They say you get pregnant, you get out of school. There is no framework that embraces them to stay back in school.
I saw a commissioner of, I think, secondary education saying that they have revised the policies to allow those children to get back to school, but he also stated that, you know, schools are not maternity wards. So they also don't know, they're not health facilities, they don't know how to deal with some of these things. I don't know where they go back after they've given birth and who looks after the children. It's a whole complex thing. But I like that you are proposing a multi-stakeholder approach, because I was going to ask you, you're asking them to go back, but will they be received well? The stigma, the expulsions we hear about in schools. Yes.
That is why I'm trying to come to a sense where I'm trying to say that, can we create like psychological centers or rehabilitation centers within the framework of the education system, where these people can be embraced back? Because if we come back to get to know the causes of teenage pregnancy, they are so vast and so many, but I would stick to the line of education. I feel education is still a grooming center for them. Can we build those centers where when they go back to school, it's easy for them to adopt into that situation? If that fails, there's an option. The government has liberalized everything. There's an option of adult education, which I applaud this government for doing. Really, I have seen people who are products of adult education who have gone like, you know what, this is not the end, let me go back to school. They can still go back to those adult classes. I don't think in the adult education scheme there is a limitation of you don't have to be pregnant or you don't have to be having your child. I've seen people who go there as alternative methods. They're in class, then all of a sudden there are phone calls, they have to attend to their maternal issues, they have to attend to. Yes, can we try to embrace such aspects? Can we bring them on board as the government is giving them to us? Can we try to make them more functional, because they have not been so functional as they have been? That's why the information is not out there. So can we try to come back to these systems and try them out? There are solutions for teenage pregnancies. I will not say that let schools, as I said, accept them into, because it's like we are encouraging more of teenage pregnancies, that there's solution for it. But wherever there's a problem currently that we have, because the teenage pregnancies at spike, and we are trying to also fight the issue of school dropouts over girls. So that could be the proposals I'm giving could be trying to embrace them into a framework where they can find a better educational ground.
Thank you very much, Vicky. Government, civil society organizations, private sector, you have your obligations cut out for you. And maybe we are going to have jobs for the very many graduates of social work and social administration that the president keeps saying may not be very helpful. But to you, Robert, earlier on you talked about, I don't remember the exact word you used, but you suggested a comprehensive or multi-stakeholder approach to dealing with these challenges. And so we are interested. You're a very global citizen. We're interested in you breaking that down for us a little bit more. Because when we look at the government, it looks like they're firefighting. You know, they deal with this. As you're running on teenage pregnancies, you hear this way, the market vendors have an issue. As you're there, the teachers are bricklaying. As you're there, the doctors, as you're there, the producers and artists are heading to Guru. So what does a multi-stakeholder approach look like, or that comprehensive solution you're suggesting?
One, government must remember that the education sector is part of the productive sectors. I think they've taken the education sector to be a liability rather than an asset. And this is a role of citizens and educationists to amplify the voices that the education sector contributes a lot to the economy. For example, when I pay school fees, I'm contributing something to the economy. You know how much private students in Makerere pay. Government taps into these resources and actually uses it for something else. They use it for wage bills, for the teachers, for their teachers. When a school goes and purchases kilograms and kilograms of posho from a farmer or from some other producer, they are contributing to the economy. I think once government remembers, once citizens alarm government that the education sector contributes a lot to the broader economy, I think government will prioritize the education sector. Closing schools was not the only option. For example, in government, work had to go on. They tell you scale down the numbers of people who are attending. Let people come in phases. Is this too much to task the education sector? And I think citizens, this goes back to citizens who have given up on their country. If citizens amplify the voices, government will come up with solutions. It will call upon other stakeholders. It will let even the civil societies do their contributions. Recently, you know, the cramping down on civil society is something that I'm totally against, because they complement a lot, especially on the education, on issues of teenage pregnancies, on issues of child labor. I think it's high time government also let other sectors to prosper, like the civil society. It's high time to engage one another, to come up with a cooperation framework and establish a fund for disaster management, so that we don't have to wait for disasters to happen and we look for resources here and there, here and there. If once we have this fund available, we can choose to help these other institutions, the organized institutions. I earlier say that education and church institutions are the most organized institutions. You can choose to agree with me or not, but they are the most organized institutions. Government can establish a framework, a cooperation framework, not just alone, but with the civil societies, with the stakeholders like churches. You know, churches are the biggest, they make the biggest contribution to the education sector. The schools where I went to, they were established by churches. I think it's high time you invite them on table, not to neglect them. You invite the stakeholders and come up with a cooperation framework. We cannot achieve Vision 2030 when our children are home, when certain sectors are only taken as liabilities rather than assets, like the education sector. We cannot achieve the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. We cannot achieve SDG 4 when we neglect other sectors, or we choose that other sectors are a liability rather than an asset. I think a cooperation framework can be designed. Recently, United Nations has a framework that it has established for Uganda. I think if government can resort to that framework, we shall have sustainable solutions.
What do you mean? The UN came up with a framework. What's that?
Yes, we have a United Nations cooperation framework for Uganda. And we capture a lot of interventions on education. But it's very absurd that we invest a lot in research we invest a lot of resources in coming up with such policies and frameworks, and then they are neglected. These frameworks can be benchmarks to establish other frameworks. The fund, can we look at the modus operandus of the NSSF fund, and we establish a fund for disasters? So that
Actually, that fund is a matter of the Constitution. There's a constitutional provision, which I think the human rights lawyers could take government to court, because it has never been implemented. There's a disaster commission that's supposed to be created with a fund that is non-existent.
But one major call for us to establish that fund, it is the citizens to demand for what rightly belongs to them. Government has a social contract to look after you, to protect you, to look after you, to look after your life. For example, we are talking of vaccinating teachers. We don't have, you hear the ping pong every day that we can't access vaccines, we can't do this, we can't do this. COVID has been with us for 1.5 years.
But to be fair, vaccines have been, the ping pong for vaccines is global. It's not just in Uganda.
But why is it a special case for Uganda? I think it's a matter of, we have conflict of interests. People want to be blockers for vaccines. That's where the gap is, not that we cannot access them.
Wow, we shall ask for some of that evidence.
One wants to own the tender to supply Uganda, and is a Ugandan who wants to supply Uganda.
Where do you get this information? I have not heard that anywhere.
Access to information is a human right to everybody, and I encourage all citizens to do more research. You don't have to wait for schools. I'm constantly in school, not in the structures.
Thank you, Robert. I see you coming for us. I'll not allow you. I'll go to Julia. You brought a dimension to this discussion which I've kept going back to, which was about opening, yes, but how about the challenges that have come up? And one of those challenges that has been discussed is the issue of inequality. Of course, we already had an unequal society, but now, when you talk about internet, you find that out of 100 students, there are only 30 showing up. When you talk, you already mentioned how going back to school, some parents have fallen through, and therefore may not be able to facilitate their children to go back to school. We know those who have lost jobs, those who worked around the education value chain. So it looks like the world, like the UN Secretary General says, has become unequal. COVID has exposed us and worsened the inequality. So what does one do? On one hand, you want to say, at least let's save those who can be saved. On another hand, the Musiimes of this world and the Roberts of this world are saying, no, leaving no one behind. So would we rather all just stay behind and wait until when we can all move? Or does one save those who can be saved?
I think, first of all, I don't agree with moving with everyone, because it seems to be not feasible in such a time. But I also don't agree with leaving the majority behind. What do I mean? You are rushing to save those you can save who already look like they're already saved. When I talk about the inequality, right from primary, secondary, you see how some families have not been affected by COVID. They've already invested, they have their lives continuously moving on. We've had parents who even removed their kids from private to international schools, so their life moved on. Others had private tutors. But I want to speak from an angle of being or having a chance to be in a public university. Because I've seen most of these things, that their roadmaps and plans not actually being feasible because the majority are being affected. The reason I say that, as you want to save those that you can save, put in mind the impact of COVID on the people you're saving. You can then say we go back, just like I told you, private institutions will not waive that tuition because they're still paying the same taxes. So as the government, that is where you come in. You see, all I'm trying to show is this is a time where education and health should be a priority. Health could be, but education is not. You cannot tell me you are proposing that schools adopt to ODEL, and at the same time, the parliament passes the internet tax. you want students to study online, but you're also making data more expensive. So as the ministry, as the government is trying to save us, we only ask of them to actually save us, not to, okay, you can go, if you can adopt, you can adopt. That is not
Giving
really
and
going to work.
taking,
Exactly, because being in a public university has showed me that, fine, if we look at Odell, what else are you putting on table to make it easier for people to adopt? That is where the government should come in. There are very many options, and it's up to them to choose any of them that works for them. But all I'm trying to stress out is, as you expect us to adopt, give us an incentive to adopt, given the fact that there are very many things that have come up as an impact of COVID. Right now, I'm a government student, but again, the number of government students or students on government has been constant ever since that was introduced. This is a time where I would expect government or Ministry of Education to at least look into increasing the number of students on government. We have student loans, but again, student loans are limited to scientists. Being a business student, I feel like, okay, existing in such a time, medical students, go back, you're still home. Okay, all I'm trying to say is there's some of the programs that government has in place which could be good if diversified in one way or the other to enable us to adopt and go back to school with not so much ease, but at least with a ladder to step on with the adoption.
Wow, thank you very much. Unfortunately, time is not on our side. We'd have loved to listen to you more and more. So we are going to have about 2 minutes each to just give our parting shot. It can be anything. It may be something you think has not come out that you came with or that has come up as we discussed. You know, it could be thanking our camera people and the producers. It can be anything. So you have your 2 minutes, and I'm going to start with you, Vicky.
Wow, thank you so much. Well, the issue of, I was reading, he's called the people's president. He was talking something, and later on the president spoke about it, and he was like resounding back to him. But really, he said that the closing of school is just, according to the UNICEF and UNESCO reports, it's a generation catastrophe. That's what he called it. Like, what are we on? What is really happening? We are seeing, I will not just speak, but look at the high crime rate that is happening because schools are down. Look at the vices in society because schools are down, because schools are closed. As the government is thinking of opening schools, can it open the schools? Yes. But can it put into consideration the kind of proposals that we are laying out here? Can it really be, because we are trying to save, I don't believe that our future is tomorrow. No, our future is now. So if the government fails, or if we fail into grooming the citizens that we want right now, they are going to become a problem to us in the next time to come. So I would still encourage, and I'm really grateful for Civic Space TV for this initiative, really, that it's sounding, and I pray that it's carried on and people get to listen out to whatever views that happen onto this platform. It's a very educative platform, and it really raises out issues out there that people should ponder on and think about in their daily course of life. So basically, that is.
Thank you, Vicky. As Civic Space TV, we're encouraged. Robert.
I'm very grateful for the invitation at Civic Space TV. It's Maiden Day.
Yes, yes.
Extremely excited about this exposure that you are giving me. I call upon all citizens. Let's engage. Let's not give up on our country. Everything that happens is for us, and there is nothing for us without us. We cannot achieve quality education. We cannot achieve SDG 4 when schools are closed. We cannot achieve Agenda 2030 that we are talking about.
Or Vision 2040.
Exactly. We cannot achieve the global goals when the most instrumental institutions are closed. Let's open schools. Government, don't take this burden on your own. Invite other stakeholders like the civil societies instead of closing them down. Let work proceed. This country belongs to all of us. The education sector is a very, very big sector. It contributes a lot to the economy. Let's not take it as as a liability, but rather an asset. Unless the education sector prospers, that's when all other sectors, we are talking about human capital development. How can you achieve it when schools are closed, when the knowledge hubs are closed? So I think it's high time we open schools. Let's find modalities how we can have schools running. Let's observe the SOPs as citizens. I think it will be easier for government to cooperate. Those who wish to go for vaccination, go for vaccination. It's good for us, it's good for all. In order to achieve SDG 4, schools must be open. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Robert, and we are glad that you honored our invitation. Yes, Julia.
Thank you, Civic Space TV and everyone out there watching. I would like to say this is a huge platform, and we are so grateful to having shared our opinions and deliberations on the topic. All I can say is that we have overly talked about the government, but the responsibility is in all our hands as the citizens of Uganda, students, teachers, everyone, every stakeholder. It's upon us to do whatever we can to help bridge the gap that has been caused by the impact of COVID-19. All I can say is we as students feel like the government is not making education a priority, and we feel like we should see more of investments in the digital infrastructure, in so much that would actually help us to adopt to the new normal, to the now normal life. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Always a pleasure having you. Yes.
So you see, government, if you do not prioritize education, you are not going to have eloquent people like Julia, you know, or eloquent people like Advocate Matanda, Robert, and you know, Vicky. So education should be prioritized. I think students also should agitate. It's no crime to agitate. Hit the streets, demonstrate, write articles, do everything to wake these guys up, you know. Yeah, wake these guys up because they have to act. And also I encourage people to go and vaccinate, those ones who can, because there is something, at least there are some efforts to vaccinate. Go and vaccinate. I've myself got the 2 jabs of AstraZeneca.
Kongs.
So I am among those
We are waiting for you to die.
I'm among those people whom people, you know, and I'm also waiting for the unvaccinated. So yeah, people should, and also government should be more innovative into and prioritize education, because education, like any other right, is part of our rights that are not, with other rights. Education is not supposed to be divided, because rights are indivisible. They're all together and they run together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Musiime. Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Vicky. It has been, of course, a deep conversation, and thank you for sticking with us. As usual, we ask you to engage by making comments on YouTube. Of course, I hope you have already subscribed, by retweeting and replying to these conversations on Twitter. For the defiant ones who are still on Facebook, by sharing and taking these conversations there. For the leaders, don't get tired of us. Maxwell said everything stands and falls on leadership. So unfortunately, there is no second way about it. Everything has to keep coming back to you as leaders, and we shall not tire from telling you that education is the greatest tool for individual and social transformation. So we shall keep singing this song and taking all actions until when we get there. In the end, we are not just lamenting or laying blame, but we all want a better country, and we want future generations to be better than us, and that can only happen through education. I remain Matanda Abubaker, for God and my country.